approaching 10 o'clock on Saturday. The press people are actually here. The true believers, yes. So today's panel is about monsters. So we're trying to structure the panel for both those folks that are fans of monsters, readers of monsters, as well as we have a number of writers, authors, and aspiring authors in the audience. So I've got about half of the time blocked for questions for the panel, and then the other half, or a third, for you guys. So do you guys have questions? Yes. Yes? Yeah. All right, so we're going to get started with just some introductions. We'll start at the end of the table, and we'll come this way.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Wesley Chu. I'm a New York Times best-selling author of 14 books, I think, primarily science fiction and fantasy. I've also, this is my newest series, the War Art Saga by Del Rey Books. I've also written 2 books in the Cassandra Clare Shirtaloon universe, and Robert Kirkman has asked me to write a book for The Walking Dead in China. Other than that, this is my second Dragon Con, and I'm happy to be here.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for ditching the parade for the real cool stuff. I am the one, the only, the R.E. Carr, award-winning author of 20 books, including the Rules Undying series. I have vampires, werewolves, and death otters in my arsenal, so I am really happy to talk about it.
Hi, I'm J.D. Blackrose. I can't say I'm the New York Times best-selling whatever, but I am a working author, which, frankly, New York Times bestseller. Thank you, Tina. We love you.
You put it on ringer?
I did. I brought it over here.
I brought in one too, so don't worry.
Anyway, I'm excited to be here. I'd love to talk about monsters.
G'day, I'm Shirtaloon. I write. I don't have to bring reasons. I write He Who Fights with Monsters, which is about a guy who fights with monsters. So that should work out nicely.
Hello, I'm Michael J. Allen. Wow, I'm Michael J. Allen. Yeah, wow. Lost my eyesight and got weird feelings.
All feelings are weird.
Professional goofball, owner of Star Wars titles, and the USA Today best-selling author of Soup to Nuts Science Fiction and Fantasy.
And hello, I'm Robert Ross. I write urban fantasy, sci-fi, and one paranormal romance that forced me to write. Read the author's note on that one, give me a backstory. The 2 books we have front, they were both #1 on Audible. Actually, no, the other one wasn't #1 because Matthew McConaughey. What did King come to? What? Yeah, Matthew McConaughey kicked me off to #1. Sure. So yeah, 16 books in market, 3 in the can, 1 coming out Tuesday. Just missed Dragon Con. So looking forward to this panel, and we're going to jump into monsters. So the first question I have for the panel is monsters do's and don'ts. So if you guys could talk to me about the one thing you do, you try to do, and then the one thing you try not to do when you're creating your monsters.
So one of the things that I like to do, of course, is to take folklore and twist it and rebirth it into a new form. And the reason I bring that up is because that's great, because it's interesting, and it gives readers new perspectives on things. Like in one of my books, I have the Fey brownies, except they look like little cousin hits and they spin like car wash noodles. The problem is when you take something like that, like say vampires, and you do it in a different way, and suddenly they're sparkling. Not everybody's happy with it. So you've got to balance.
Should be happy with that.
Well, you got to balance how far you take things away from the norm for people's comfort's sake, while still being able to give them new ideas. So that is the do and the don't.
Cool.
I don't know. Maybe I don't have any rules, which may
So sometimes it'll be vampires, my own take on vampires, whatever that could be, and then sometimes it'll be something, you know, holy and brave. So I guess, you know, the one thing I try to do is always make it just interesting. Like try to stay away from something that's like, there's nothing wrong with going for classics, but I think there's a difference between classic and generic. And so I sometimes try to stay away from something that's which I think, yes,
Boring
yes,
is the
and,
sin.
yeah, don't be boring. Yeah, great advice. And I'm sure you definitely need me to take that.
I would say that the key for me is to think of whatever I'm going to do a monster like this because often it's the humans who are the worst monsters. To make them 360 so that you understand their motivations and why they're doing what they're doing. They're still the bad guy, right? Like you don't agree with them, but make sure that it doesn't. They're just not like, well, sort of like you were just saying. They're not just this flat like curly mustache bad guy, right? Like they need to have motivations of their own. They need to be full fleshed out characters of their own. They need to have backstories of their own. Otherwise, I find that monsters are uninteresting, right?
Well, I like to have two very important distinctions. There's monsters, which are effectively plot points. They are tools. They are, especially if you're writing something like lit RPG, they're an experience bag. So in that case, I want to make sure those monsters are, one, cool, interesting, and two, they serve a plot point that really fits. What I also do is I love to have characters that you would traditionally think are monsters, you know, your vampires, your werewolves, and once you strip it away, I try to very much make them human and not make their monstrous aspects overcome them in any way more than a human character could be, say, hangry, you know. I think it's very important, especially if you're writing urban fantasy and you're using these characters as protagonists, that you turn monster into just another character and you really focus on what makes them human and don't fall into the trap of, oh, my sparkling wonder, I'm angsty. And it just becomes very flat. And as I'm sure we'll hear, there's a very big difference between a trope, which is just a framework that gives you reference, and a cliche, and that's when it makes you cringe.
So the thing about monsters is that obviously there's different prisms of what constitutes a monster in terms of environment. But for me, I think one of the most things I keep in mind is that things don't exist in isolation. So when you have a monster, as in like an actual monster, not like a person which is a terrible person, we're dealing with, I like to think of it like this way, is if your story is a play, and your environment is a stage, how static is your stage? You know, I see a lot of writers that do this where they keep, you know, they build a stage, they put the characters in, and they go, you know, go. But in reality, you know, your environment is also a character. And if someone was talking about monsters in that framework, then a monster is also a character in its own way. So when you craft a monster, one of the questions I ask is like, why does that thing live there? Why does it exist there? You know, what parts about this monster makes it beneficial for it to be in that environment? Like when I was a kid, I played D&D, and we'd go to a dungeon crawl at the very bottom of the dungeon where you finally meet the big bad dragon at the very bottom.
What does it eat?
No, but like, how did it get there? I mean, you know, where does it fly to? Like, okay, good example. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go to tangent. A good example was like, I bought a house in LA like a few years ago, and then I actually ended up moving to the house next to the one I was gonna buy. So, but during my housewarming party, my next door neighbor showed me a picture of a rattlesnake he killed. Okay, it's a 7 foot tall, 7 foot long rattlesnake in his front yard that he had like, that was fenced off by snake wire. I'm like, how the hell did that snake get there? That snake got there when it was a baby and has been like living in that yard space for the past like 7 years or something like that. Okay, I'm glad to buy that house. But
I love the snake.
But the point is like we have to have the environment has to influence why an organism exists there. Like what, you know, like what is happening there that this monster with these three appendages that has these slant trails or whatever, the biology has to explain what is going on with that monster and that environment.
Cause magic is not always an answer.
It's always an answer. It's not always the best answer.
Very good.
All right, great answers. For me, I start with the foundational premise that I try never to break, which is that a monster, it's a sentient monster. A monster or any other kind of villain is really not a villain in their own story. So they never wake up in the morning and go, I'm just evil for evil's sake, unless there's like a mental issue. That's usually for humans, because we're really the only ones that get to do that. So if you start with that premise, then what I try to figure out is not making that monster two-dimensional. What are its motivations, whether that's just food-based or it's power or it's whatever its motivations are. And then the second part of it is I try to make sure that every of those creatures, every of those that I dream up or create, that they reflect or reveal something about the main protagonist. So sometimes it's a mirrored image. Sometimes it reveals something to the protagonist that the protagonist didn't know existed within them. But as they're in conflict with this, that gets revealed. And I found from the reviews, when people that write to me, they find that really intriguing, which is why I try to do more. What you guys write to us, that we should listen to because we work for it. And so those are the two key things that I start off with. Okay, so the second question is, let's talk classic monsters, things like vamps, lycans, djinn, and fae. So which of those or any other classics that we would all recognize immediately do you guys use, if any? And we'll start this time at Deacon.
So I wrote 2 Shadowhunter books with Cassandra Clare. So Cassandra Clare has a very popular Shadowhunter universe, and it has the whole spectrum of vampires, fays, werewolves. And then when I wrote the Walking Dead book, I obviously wrote zombies. But I mean, if you want to know, like, zombies really aren't monsters. Zombies are forces of nature. Zombies are hurricane. Zombies are flood after a storm. So,
What classics do you use?
So I guess I've written a lot of them then. I mean, I have not written mummies or other things, but more recently with Art of Prophecy. Art of Prophecy is a Asian epic fantasy. It's kind of like my love letter kung fu movies. So definitely I've been able to kind of play with, certain probably less well-known monsters in the Western world. The Five Brothers, the Righteous Lions, and all.
If you do 100 push-ups.
You have to do 100 push-ups.
I hope they're not asking me.
I'll do $1 push-up. I know, but yeah. So I mean, definitely, I feel like we have when you say classic monsters, that's a very westernized stuff. We're talking about banshees, or anything in very, very medieval Europe, and there is a wealth of quote-unquote classic monsters in other regions that we really should be exploring because, there's a lot of cool untapped stuff that we can use, that we can kind of not only use because it's something exotic and something that's not Asian or African or whatever, but how they interact with, there's premises. Has anybody played the new game Wukong?
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's a beautiful game, and it has. There's so many classic Chinese monsters and spirits in there that when you see for the first time, if you've never seen it before, you'll be like, oh my gosh, that is the weirdest thing. And it's just really cool to explore these kind of things.
So, yes, I'm the vampire writer, and I'm not meaning to yuck anyone's yum, but I did actually get dared to write a Revenge Against Twilight as my first book, and that's how I got published. What I decided to do with vampires, because they are so well trodden, is I know The Strain did it and several others, but I took them out of myth and out of anything magical, and I made them science-based. I love deep-sea creatures, and I saw siphonophores, these colonial organisms, and I thought, what if something like that developed an intelligence and wanted to be free of the depths, and thus it uses humans as sort of a carrier. And all of a sudden I had I could have them be staked and killed because they have an anaphylactic allergy to cellulose. And yes, I did kill some vampires by blowing up cheap Parmesan cheese. So it's lovely. I think there's a certain joy in taking something that you think can be so rote and just going, what if? What if it's this? What if it's something ridiculous? And when you free yourself from that, you can do something that is, in one hand, on the surface, very familiar. And then when you start plumbing in, you go, wait a minute, why can't they see the reflections? Why am I using Predator to explain why they don't see reflections? And then you discover they can't use a faucet because it doesn't register their hand, and they're always causing a scene when they leave the bathroom. And that kind of thing. And then you can just start building conflict by doing one little thing different. And I think it's important to have fun. You don't have to do something exactly the same, but you can leave that little veneer and just sort of lure people in. And yes, my werewolves are accountants, and it's also a virus. So that's the ones I play with. I do have some magical ones, but I love talking about the sci-fi ones, just because I find it more fun.
Well, Wesley was saying zombies are like the hurricane, whatever. In my case, my zombie is a cosmetologist, and he's like the cosmetologist, the biggest and brightest stars in Hollywood. No one really thinks he's a zombie; they just think he's eccentric. And he was turned into a zombie during the Civil War. Battle of Shiloh, and all he wants to do is die, and can't, because you can put him in a blender and he will still reconstitute. So
I would do that in my books, just to explain.
Right. So that's sort of how I tried to play with it to make him different. I'll be honest with you, if you hear anybody around say it's the penis book, that's this book. He has a problem with certain body parts on, and it's one of the funniest books I've ever written. So it's playing with a very classic trope and really turning it on its head. In this series, this is the first of the series. It's called the Summoner's Mark series. This is called Demon Kiss. In this series, I have a lot of fit. She goes into the Fey realm. She goes to hell and has to deal with Lucifer, and there's a lot going on. And again, what I said earlier is that I tried to make them understandable as monsters. Like Queen Titania in Fairy, in the second one, Fay Cross, is really mean to her, not a nice person, but she has very good reasons. And that's what I like to do. Jin, at one point, he just needs to go back where he came from.
Anyone got a discount lamp?
Yeah, right. So he's actually trapped in a crystal lamp. I decided to change that. But yeah, so it's just sort of taking the traditional monsters and you were right, Wesley, to say they're Western monsters.
Yes, Western traditional.
And trying to find something, like you were saying, Rachel, that just makes them a little one less thing with soul wars. Vampires have souls and vampires who don't, and there's a reason for that. And that sort of creates the tension.
My series uses like a panoply of different monsters, and I rarely go for like traditional things. Mine tend to be usually more alien, but like I do have vampires that I use in different ways. Like there's that tension between the sort of vampire with humanity and the one that has that more feral aspect, and I sort of explore the conflicts as different environmental factors play on that. But also, like, there's some original vampires out in the open and explore that as sort of bloodthirsty political force.
Vampires are so great for politics.
Yeah, but I also, because I use so many different monsters, I do like to dip into some of the other stuff. So I've been able to dip into some of the Australian monsters a little bit. which all have weird names like Yao.
Oh, yeah.
But
You try to pronounce some of them and you go.
yeah, but some aren't really going to work for my story. Like the aliens, they're crazy. Like I was on a trip, some portions of the Outback a few years ago, and I got to see some fantastic, like thousands of years old, indigenous Australian art caves, and it was fantastic. And some of the monsters they had were like amazing, but I can't use them unless I want to sort of age up my books quite a lot. It's like using certain body parts that are all of a sudden like really, really long to just sneak into camps and drag away children.
Just imagine what those parts are. I remember
and I'm like, no, like that's amazing, but no.
It's okay, I have fun with the North American. There are some amazing North American. It's not just coyote trickster spirits, I swear.
I decided early on, and by saying decided, I know that that's going to break here soon. Somebody's going to make me break it. To avoid vampires and werewolves, mostly because there are better writers that know them better, that can do them better, as entirely exampled by my left side here. So I like to go into different things. In my Blood Phoenix Chronicles, I feature 6 different kinds of elemental shape-shifting phoenixes. And that book is a little more complicated than I can really give justice to here, but ultimately those phoenixes are a police force to protect the planet from the invading Fae, because I love to play with the Fae in completely different angles, especially the lesser Fae. I mean, the big She are all sorts of fun. But so the Fae are start the book by breaking into Atlanta and raiding an animal shelter for food. Our Phoenix is there to protect the puppies and the kittens, which is all well and good. We later find out that the Phoenixes are basically a replacement for the angels because they can't be trusted anymore, and the Fae are all the children of the fallen. So, I mean, I've got mixed metaphors all over the place here.
That's so cool, though.
At the same time, like in the Dumpstermancer series, I've got fairy rats. My main character is somehow betrothed to one of them, so I'm not sure how that happened.
Are they sure how it happened?
No, she just said that I'm a girl rat, and girl rats are allowed to choose their husband, and you're it. And the Magus is like, what? Huh? And that's caused all sorts of bloody chaos.
Girl rats have more rights than some.
They did. This society, I won't talk about other societies, that's a different panel. I love to push the envelope. Like I already talked to you about the brownies, the Carr wash brownies, which I just thought was such a great way to handle the old brownie. They still get milk and a bit of honey candy for payment. The Fae I play around with a lot. I haven't been out with the Jinn yet, but that does sound like fun. I have done a lot of Therocephalites from Egyptian mythology, some Chinese mythology, some South American mythologies, based on whatever book I'm talking about, because I've got so many different other things going on. But for classics, vampires and werewolves, I avoid so far because other people are better at it. Jinn, again, and I love to play with Fae of all kinds of things.
All right, so my monster is just that. So it's I try to focus. I think Wesley mentioned this earlier. That I think one of the dangers we have is we a lot of times are too U.S. centric in our writing. So, for example, my sci-fi book is based out in Kenya, and my in my urban fantasy books, the monster manual, if you will, is really broad-based. So there's a lot of Asian-based monsters. Some of those are demonic. So in the fall, some of them went across a different world, and they then became part of that culture. If you're going to trip up your culture, you better know it. It makes it more effective. So I've got vampires. They don't sparkle. I'm super excited about Nosferatu coming out because there's going to be another vampire. Lycans. Jinn, I think, are really interesting, and you don't see a lot of them. And when you do, it's kind of the Aladdin Jinn as opposed to the real kind of malevolent Jinn that have massive powers. That it's almost like the monkey paw. Have you ever guys read Monkey Paw? So it's true.
Some of them are good if you really look into the Islamic good. original stories, some Jim would consider helpful.
Yeah, because it's not, and that gets to kind of the first part is like that two-dimensional. It's like they have their own motivations. So some gins started out great and they had a really crappy time, and then some of the classic ones you get stuck in a bottle, which isn't all gin, but that's going to probably sour your own life.
Not all gin.
And then obviously the Fae are a lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead and pivot to the next question. I'll take it first and then send it back down there because it's really the other half of that, which is when you create these monsters, what do we create them on? What do we base them on? Do we take it just out of our head? There's that old trope that there are no new stories, just new variations of old ones. And so that gets especially true when it comes to some of these historic creatures. So for me, I take a lot of my lessons from Greek mythology, from Asian mythology, and then classics like Gothic. So for those of you who are aspiring writers, invest the time in reading Byron, invest the time in reading Poe, invest the time in reading Stoker. And it really will allow you to have that in your mind as you create while not being derivative. You got to be careful about making sure you're not derivative. I also am a child of the 80s, so I have an original first edition Dungeons and Dragons monster manual.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
So skimming through that, you find all sorts of really cool things. Asmodeus made it into my books from that one. And then with the Fae, I have a deep love affair of Shakespeare. So my Fae, like poet fairy, can only speak in rhyme when she leaves the realm of Fae, which is a huge pain in the ass, right? So it was too late. So that's another lesson as authors. Like, write yourself into it, and then you have to have an entire chapter done in verse. That's all sorts of fun. But based on Shakespeare. So that entire part of the book reads like Midsummer Nights. So if you can pull it off, which took a long time to get right, and a bunch of beta readers telling me I got it wrong, it's a lot of fun to find that derivation to go with it.
Yep. So I come at it from two different directions. First off, there's the folklore, and I have every version of D&D Monster Manual, plus Gamma World and Cyberpunk, and Teenagers from Outer Space, and pretty much anything other role-playing game that came out in the 80s. And I love taking common concepts, like I have a Blood Phoenix instead of a Fire Phoenix. I do have a Fire Phoenix, they're on the same team. But, what would it be like? How would they be reborn? What essence would rebirth them? That sort of stuff. And I love taking those common myths and twisting them around and finding new and interesting ways to play with them, which again, some people get upset about. And many trolls yell at me for having a water phoenix as a main character.
Haters gonna hate.
Forest trolls or bridge trolls? Or internet trolls?
Internet trolls.
Okay.
Internet trolls. Forest trolls, that one. Particularly if you need an extra wood because they regenerate. The other side of that is I completely agree with Wesley on designing creatures that aren't necessarily sentient, but can be in some cases. It's about ecological niches. How does the creature fit into the ecology of the system? What is it a predator? Is it a prey animal? How does it hunt? I came up with a series of basically weird bulldogs with no eyes that are psionically connected and are the way to create everlasting life in one of my book series. And that was all about, okay, what would you have here and how would it work? So on one hand, twist the fates. I've got the D&D books. I've got, God knows how many fairy encyclopedias on old folklore. And then others, I just find a niche and fill it with my imagination.
I was pretty shameless in how I set up my story universe, in that I more or less gave myself a toolbox to throw anything at the wall. I've just got monsters coming out, so I can have anything from...
You need a lot.
Yeah, so I can have anything from like massive cosmic entities to like tyrannical pheasant, which is basically an angry chicken.
But it tastes better, but it's harder to cook.
Only if it's aged in an inventory.
Yeah. So, when I approach monsters, I do approach it from an ecological perspective, where whatever environment you're in, it's like a new apex predator just sort of drops out of the sky and starts throwing But it gives me a lot of breadth to sort of explore different ideas. So I can go sort of somewhere between Lovecraft and like an alien movie and have like this kind of 2 feet more instead of a tongue. It's like you can cover the arm, just reaching out. And then, but I can also have something that's, just sillier, like something that would come from an incredibly low-budget sci-fi movie, like a shark crab. Just called it
Shark crab noodles?
Yeah, yeah, the shad. Yeah, I think my approach is just giving myself the opportunity to sort of play with all different kinds of things rather than just go with one. But I do try to have an amount, because if you just throw everything random at the wall and you don't have any real sort of depth to like the sort of monster ecology, monster community, then it becomes really shallow. And
So it's like a looter shooter game.
yeah, and that is a danger in the kind of approach I take. So I also try to have more cohesive aspects to it. And when there's a lot of sort of monsters as protagonists, and when I do that, I quite often try to make them like really brave, really when you've got what's ostensibly a good guy, but he really just wants to eat every single living thing on the planet.
Vampire problems, next hashtag.
Yeah, but yes. But then, I also and he's that particular character started off as a fairly isolated thing, and it wasn't too much later where I start bringing in sort of what that kind of entity is and how it exists and how it relates to other aspects. But I think it's pretty important to have that there.
Yeah.
So you just don't end up making like a really bad version, like a bad third-party monster panel where they try to fill in with terrible ideas because everyone used to.
That's actually hilarious. So I don't have a copy of it up here, but I have a book called Devil's Been Busy, which is my Monster Hunter Mom book. It's $400 in one. And I wrote it because all the monster hunters that I was reading were men with big guns, and they were going out and they were shooting everything. And I was like, that's fine, I enjoy them, but I was like, I'm going to do something different. So I wrote a mom, who's going to have a good marriage with 3 young children, and I thought, well, she's not going to have a whole arsenal of, semi-automatic machine guns lying around, because she has little kids. So I decided she could only use the things that are in the back of a Toyota Sienna minivan. And I did eventually give her one magical hatchet, because I needed something with a little more power. But she uses things like Little League sports equipment, spray and wash, jump rope, and so that was sort of my big rule. It's like she's going to have to be able to conquer this thing with really everyday materials, no guns. And then the other thing is that she's sort of hapless. She's infinitely better and older than I am, but she does have 3 children and lives in the suburbs of Cleveland, and because I like to stretch, and but she always loses a shoe, and so I thought, well, the basic thing is whatever monster I put in there has to cause as much havoc as possible, and she still has to not only beat it but sort of hide it from let's say she sort of pushed and guilted into going on a field trip with her kid. And she literally has to get counseling around this. I don't want to be around the PTA moms. Please don't make me go, And she does, and there's a kitsune in the museum, and they're very, very troublesome, right? Kitsune are very troublesome. And then I thought, well, that's not troublesome enough. I'm going to throw in an imp. So, she's running around and trying to figure out how to beat these monsters with no guns or anything like that, and also hide the havoc. So my rule, those were sort of my two rules. There has to be like maximum havoc, and she still has to be able to beat them with what's in the back of her minivan, basically. So that's sort of where my guide rails, which, I mean, they're pretty broad, but it still meant like, you know, there was no option to like pull out a, you know, like a massive, you know, cannon and be like, boom, and blow you away, yay. So, like, yeah.
I have a question, it's okay.
Yeah.
Does she have like a shoe fetish, Prince Charming chasing after her?
Monster bring them back.
It's four novellas that are put in one. And does anybody here old enough to remember the Traveling Wilburys? Yes. Okay. Anyway, so I love the Traveling Wilburys. Look it up, Google it. It was like a super band and Boy Anderson and Tom Petty. It was great. So the four novellas are all Traveling Wilbury songs. So the first one is Potui and the Monkey Man, and the second one is like Handle with Care, and then there's Runaway, and then there's End of the Line. These are all plays on Traveling Wilbury songs, and the whole title is The Devil's Been Busy, which is a lesser known Traveling Wilbury song, and only one person has ever come up to me and said, oh my God, the Traveling Wilbury. So I gave him a free book. But, so I just did that because I love it. But at the end of, at the end of the very first novella, she has to get snacked to kindergarten on time, and she just, you know, also had to save she also had to kill a were-gorilla. So, as you do, because, you know, that's just her day job, and she goes like, her hair's like, and she's got one shoe, and she limps into the local grocery store, and then cops are like, are you okay? You know. So I try to play with that kind of stuff, like monsters that are going to cause her as much havoc as possible, and also that she cannot kill by, you know, some magic or some giant, you know, weapon.
Let me just ask the panelists, we've got 10 minutes left for our questions, so if we can move into kind of a lightning response, like maybe 2 minutes. It wasn't directed at you, just for all of us.
Okay, so my real quick rules. What I tell people I do. Make sure to read well. Study your biology, study evolution, study myth, study folklore. Read well. How I actually design my monsters, puns and typos. I did have a character who was a comic book nerd. She's also a vampire slayer, and she keeps hearing about huge yak men. And she thinks that these vampires are massive X-Men fans until she meets the 12-foot-tall Yeti with horns, who is named Huge Yak Man. And the other one is, I was talking with my co-writer, and we were just thinking, you know what would make Harry Potter better if they had Death Otters instead of Death Eaters. And then I learned that Kushtaka exists in Tlingit folklore. And all of a sudden, we had an entire antagonistic race caused by one annoying line in the Hyatt upstairs in 2019 that caused it. So never discount any source of inspiration. Never think it's too weird, because it can sometimes be bloody brilliant.
This is a question that people want, so I'm not going to go back to it. But, so when it comes to designing monsters, I think it has to come down first to the context of what this monster is and what it's there for in the story. You know, is it a character? Is it an end boss? Is it something that kind of helps you get the experience along the way? I don't actually write that RPG, so that's just an example. But
it works.
So when you create a monster, let's say this is for an action scene, something that your protagonist has to fight. I'm known for my action scenes. That's kind of like my bread and butter. And it comes down to like I always say an action scene is a conversation with fists. Okay, it is. In my opinion, an action scene is one of the most complicated writing scenes, because you are not just doing action that's fun and cool. You are also dealing with plot points. You're dealing with character development. You're dealing with if a character comes in and out of a fight scene, a battle, the exact same way he was when he went in, then you might as well just erase that scene. So now with that context, and you bring in a monster, again, you're talking about, you know, what is the existence of this monster? What is it there for? So I kind of work around the monster. The existence of the monster is not that important. Okay, it is the trappings of what happens, the effect of what the monster does to his surroundings, which in this case is the character. So in many cases when I build a monster, I do it completely backwards because, you know, the most important thing is what it does. Your main characters are there for a reason, and they exist for whatever reason. But what you really want about them is you want to know how they make you feel. You want them to thrill you as they pull you along, and you kind of want the reverse of that when you create like an NPC monster.
All right, great. All right, and I think it'll be a last question before we go into the audience. And in 60 seconds, what would be the most creative motivation for one of your monsters, and how did it kind of come about? And we'll start with you, Wesley.
So one of my biggest monsters is one of our main characters for Art of Prophecy. Her name is Maza Kasami, and she's an assassin who can kind of like walk through, like, you know, step into shadows and step out of shadows in another location. You know, she's like a teleporting assassin. And I made her kind of a Harley Quinn in the first book. I made her really unlikable, complete psychopath, a terrible monster. And this is by design, because I actually turned off a lot of writers because they're like, this woman's too much, you know. And that's great because my entire purpose over, you know, a 1,000,000-word series is I wanted her to redeem herself in a way that is believable, you know. So I went past my red zone on what I considered like safe on creating a believable monster in a human being, because then I started putting myself in that corner. I was like, okay, now it's been published that way. I have 2 books now to redeem her.
Yeah, I think for mine, when I said, I started with the horrible, like, if Death Otters instead of Death Eaters. But I actually took a race from Tlingit motivation, from Tlingit mythology, and their motivation is they like to connect and they feed off emotions, and they love to get people to sing. And when people sing, obviously your emotions are carried with the song. So they actually stock karaoke bars and feed there. And I just love the motivation because it seems so funny and light, but the more you go into it, they're like taking people when they're innocent and think they're just expressing emotions, and they're slowly devouring their souls. But it's because their own souls are kind of empty and they live off this chaos. And when you have truly chaotic creatures, you can do things this way. When you need to break a plot, always have something that is literally chaos, because if you need to zag and you have no other way logically, you use them. So it's a way of building motivation that's interesting into story structure that can be a little more fluid.
I think, again, I keep saying the same sort of thing, which is like take an idea and turn it on its head in some way, like twist it a little way. In the Monster Hunter novels that I was mentioning, I have some little demons that are the demonettes, and they serve a purpose, but they carry pom-poms, and everything they do is a cheer. And like you were saying about the verse, so it was a bad decision, but it was a funny one. And yeah, so I just tried to take this idea of demons and then make them ridiculous.
One of my most challenging approaches was when I took what's essentially a one walks idea, but basically a bunch of leeches, the slimy goblins of flesh with teeth, and I was desperately trying to make them adorable.
See?
Yeah. And it's that tweak, and that's, you know, and sometimes, you know, like, and as it's sort of grown, become more intelligent, it's still got those desires to, you know, eat random people, you know, wipe a world clean of all living things, and, you know, you have to make that fun. And yeah, that's just making little tweaks while still keeping the core of what the original concept is.
So I've got an upcoming book series. It's basically Legally Blonde meets Scooby-Doo. And my main character wants to basically be a Hallmark character and go around to hotels and fix them and do romantic things. And she got stuck fighting supernatural creatures, and in order to keep her motivated, I gave her a tag team duo of the Demon Taco Truck, who was obsessed with picking her theme song, so was constantly playing music at random throughout various scenes, and a Resha Macedonian Pepper Tulpa, which is basically a sarcastic version of shape-shifting Genie, who's constantly trying to get on leaderboards and troll people on the internet in order to get worship points to increase his power.
Oh my God.
Very cool. All right, so the question was about motivation. So I think of all the characters across about 2 million words, I would say that this character by the name of Lamia, which is kind of a Mid-East demon, and she was a demon in the first fall and was serving to Asmodeus and was created Nephilim with Calebin, who was the bard that was the father of Merlin. So, and Asmodeus took her kids in order to make sure that she didn't fall too far close to the humans because she was in love with Calebin and she didn't want to be demonish anymore. So being able to flesh that out across a series of books and then have that motivation be dispelled by the protagonist revealed a lot about the protagonist, allows you to unfold some of the Mallory art work from Lamore Darther, and it allows you to tie all these different things that different readers may or may not have read, or because they read about it, authors did so people can read about where things come from, they might then open up and read other books, right? And then you can just broaden that out. But that I think is the most interesting motivation of any of my monsters. Okay, so we have right on time. I'm going to go ahead and shift it out to audience questions. I have some more here. If we run out, it doesn't look like we're going to. Yeah, if we can get the microphone to folks.
The question, if you want to line up right next to the door, I'll put the microphone right there.
Stand up for this one.
One's an info question and an explanation question.
We got one second. So we got a real long. I'm going to ask whoever you ask them to. Let's keep our questions really quick so that we can get through everything.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Right. You know, you do something awesome. You expect us to be quick about it. Come on now.
I have ADHD. I can speak very, very quickly.
We have 12 people. We have 12 minutes.
Yes.
Mr. Allen, you said you had a book with the elements of I didn't catch your name.
Blood Phoenix Chronicles.
Blood Phoenix Chronicles.
Complete series, no George R. R. Martin.
Yes. Well
Mr. Chu, you said there were a lot of different classic creatures in other regions. I just was hoping you could give us an example of one or two in short format.
I mean, so in the Lost Book of the White, which was the second book in the Almost Nurses universe, we actually moved to Shanghai, and like I kind of tapped into some of the mythology of the Chinese mythology. There's Sun Wukong, there's which is the Monkey King. There's the his pig friend Baji, and then if you go to like the spirits, there's the 5 Flame Brothers. There is. And it's also how the monsters are. There's the hopping vampires. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So Chinese vampires they're more like zombies, and they don't actually, they're not sentient, but they hop. They hop and they smell breath, which is kind of how they see since they're blind.
Thank you.
So cool.
That is.
This is Eric's question. He's too nervous to use the microphone this time.
It's okay,
Eric.
Eric.
Come on,
You're way
Eric.
cool, Eric. Go ahead. You got it.
So this question is for Shirtaloon. He wants to know, what is the most challenging monster that you created? Like, what monster did you make that was exceedingly difficult?
Yeah, difficult to
Just
come up with.
Come up with, or yeah.
I don't know. I'm possibly oddly enough, vampires, because I think everyone has their own little bit of take on vampires, and if you're going to integrate something like that largely throughout your work, then you need to sort of work to establish how they operate, how they're the same as sort of classic Western vampires, how are they different, and how does that play out in terms of world building. So I think rather than on an individual level, the more complex thing is like integrating something that's a large part of your well-being.
So my question is more, when you're creating monsters in a world where you have like elves, dwarves, etc., multiple species, how do you differentiate what a monster is versus, like, I mean, you have a scaly guy who's holding a hammer building a fence versus scaly guy who's carrying a sword. One's the elf's husband and the other is they call a monster. How do you, I mean, is it because is it a sentience thing, or
Who's
is
telling the story?
Yeah, who's telling the story? Because racism is real even in fiction.
That's very true.
This goes back to the thing that the actual existence of the monster is important. It is how does that entity affect things around it?
Yeah, is it a positive force? Is it a
example of
negative
that
force?
is
Is
like
it neutral?
And again, for the writers, I think I would encourage you guys to not fall into the trap of ugly is monster and beautiful is
I usually go the other way.
Yeah.
So it's boring and it's also tropey, and that doesn't mean that your monsters have to be beautiful, but especially if you have not smart. But
Only when glitter bombs.
$1 zillion.
But
Yeah.
makes it
Yeah.
so I mean, is it
it's a social distinction.
Yeah, I think it's how it fits in the context of your story, how your point of view sees them, and then if that's going to be acknowledged and admitted when they see it, or completely turned on its head when they discover the truth. That's what does it.
This one's a question for whoever wants to field it. What is the most niche mythological sort of reference that you've made in a book which someone has gotten? This can be like source of inspiration. It can be like a pun or a joke or anything.
I do have one, but no one's gotten it, so I don't know if I can answer your question. But in Demon Kiss, she spends some time in this magical library, and she's looking for books, and it's all about demons, obviously. And she finds one that says Demonologica Pro in the Syllabus, which I spent a freak ton of time on working with a Latin professor at Ohio University, because it literally translates to demons for dummies. And not one human being has ever understood it.
I had a Spanish vampire rickroll all the other vampires in Spanish at a karaoke bar. He was the vampire DJ, and he was singing "Never Gonna Give You Up" in Spanish. And one guy came up and said, "You did what?"
I had a character that was related to Boudica, and I had someone write to me to provide the entire background relationship with the vampire. And so they got that reference. Not a lot of people read that.
I had a planetary assault where like an army just kind of dropped down on Boston in a 20th
Why do
century.
you always destroy Boston?
It's Wesley. Right.
But
I do it too.
but just for kicks, I wrote this reading that, and and somebody got it. It surprised me, to be honest.
Thank you.
Who speaks?
What is a monster that you've always wanted to do but you haven't yet?
I do it whenever I want.
Yeah, I don't have it. I've done them all that I want to. But when I come up with the next one, I'll do that one too.
Yeah.
I have hit a lot. I haven't done zombies yet, and I want to see maybe what I can do with those. But I don't think I can top JT.
So kind of playing off what Mr. Chu was talking about earlier, some monsters are villains that are metaphors for like, oh, Godzilla is nuclear war and all that stuff, and other monsters are small obstacles that really don't need backstory, but creators love to create, and we like to have our own stories. I get, from an editing point of view, how do you know that you're starting to overdevelop an idea, or the shark crabs that you've got all this lore for that they do not need?
Okay, the second it becomes boring for the reader. So you're going to want to put everything in your story that you love, right? And nobody needs to know all that. So as soon as someone is reading it, like a beta reader, and you ask them, where would you stop? And they stop at the shark crabs. No,
Yeah.
They try the shark crabs because like you don't need to know everything about their evolution. That's gotta go.
Yeah.
When it turns into an exposition dump.
So, I have something I kind of teach and encourage that just-in-time world building, and it's the exact same reason why I dislike prologues. But really, when it comes to the information of who this monster is and what it is, the context should always be, in my opinion, just enough for the character, for the POV to understand what's going on. So the POV is the one that is getting the information. So anything past that is too much.
And it also depends on your protagonist. If your protagonist is a xenobiologist, they may put more details in than if your protagonist is a space marine and they just want to know where to shoot it.
Exactly. Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't have to squat. Sure. Okay, so this is a question primarily for Wesley, but it's open to all of you. So throughout this panel, you were talking about how you would play with certain monsters, like vampires, give them a twist and whatnot. But I think all of us here know what vampires are just from osmosis. However, non-Western monsters like Jingshi or fox spirits or whatnot, we had to find those by deliberately looking for them. So what I would like to know is, can you, and if so, how would you, play with expectations like with Jingshi in the same way that you all played with vampires, if your audience mostly does not have expectations to play with? Because you don't want to end up misrepresenting another culture's monsters. You don't want to make a bunch of people think, oh, so that's what, no, it's a twist or whatnot. So I'm curious about that.
So Art of Prophecy is a secondary world fantasy. So really, I cannot use the exact same words because they don't know Mandarin in the secondary world, even though it's set in China. So then what I do then is I always use descriptors. So I kind of build everything around the actual name. Okay. So then the nine-tailed fox is fox with nine tails. Okay. But then you kind of then once you kind of put on the base description, then you can put the meaning of the spirit. Why is the spirit there? Historically, how was it created? What was intent? And then you kind of subtly mold their actions and their intentions and how they make the character feel to kind of model after that creature.
Okay, so kind of like Herbert Giles. Sorry. Victorian translator. Strange Stories of Chinese Video. A lot of Chinese. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I'm perhaps the only one. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyways. Right.
When you are looking for inspiration for monsters, and you happen to come across D&D or folklore or anything like that, especially D&D since it is a franchise, how close is too close to copyright?
Well, I think a lot of the properties you have to be careful of.
Okay.
Right? So, but then some of those are actual biblical
Folklore,
right?
biblical, yeah.
There are
So they have to get
resources
inspiration
online that does say what's trademarked, particularly by Dungeons and Dragons, but always, I said, if you start with something that is a copyrighted work, just do your due diligence and make sure you look up the terms, see if it's trademarked, see if it's copyrighted, and try to go back to the source, and you should be fine. But they will find you, believe me.
Yeah, I don't want them to come.
I mean,
yeah,
but
so.
a lot of times, like D&D and stuff, taking inspiration from folklore and all that stuff anyway. So as long as you go back to
Don't use Displacer Beast.
Yeah,
number one.
I got a rubber as, so I didn't figure that one out.
I think the reality of copyright and trademarks is that 99.9% of the time you are fine, because it is not cheap to enforce the copyright. If you're for lawsuits and everything, the IP has to be worth a certain value in order for it to be actually worth suing. And 99% of the time, the worst thing they're going to do is they'll send you a cease and desist.
Yeah.
Then you just go to your PDF file and you change it.
Yeah.
You know, so you do some due diligence, but don't lose sleep over it.
Yeah, they're not that evil, even if they're worse.
Okay, so even if it's descriptively close to the same monster, but if you give it a different name,
Then you're fine.
You're fine.
you'll be fine. Okay, I do appreciate you. Thank you.
Good morning. This is a question for all y'all, but particularly for Shirtaloon. What is your favorite monster design?
Yes.
Yeah, this question's always tricky. Yeah, it's always hard to pick, like, because it's usually whatever you've been working on the most.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I just.
My favorite was a corgi, half husky, half corgi as the body of the beach. That's my current favorite.
All right, well, thank y'all.
And we are officially out of time. We want to get to a few people that are in line, and then so
Mine is 3 seconds.
Quick comment and then one question. We came here mainly because my dad put me on but I'm glad I came. Several years ago, I decided to also do like an answer to my life from the American viewpoint.
That's amazing.
I oddly decided to do it based on voodoo lore. And freaked myself out, got scared and stopped. So my question is, have you ever written a mythical character that just kind of got your imagination going to the point that you really break it? I want to talk to Wesley.
Drinking? I think the vampires, the colonial organisms invading, and like if they died, it would like rot their whole body. Yeah, that got me.
keep writing.
Keep writing, please. That sounds like an amazing story.
It really does.
Hi, you said vampire accountant and it's a virus. Which part, vampire or accountant?
Both actually, and it's werewolf accountant.
Werewolf.
Vampires are bacteria. Viruses are werewolves. Don't mix them up because antibiotics only work on one.
And like actually question though, is accountant a virus in your story?
No, but accountants seem to be evil because that's my day job.
Okay, Wesley, you have a real quick comment about a charity, and then
Yeah, so real quick, I started a tradition last year where I sold one book at every panel for charity, and last year's charity was the SAG writer strike. This year I was going to do the video game actors voiceover strike, but there's so much bad juju going on in the world, I just couldn't do it. So I'm going to do Doctors Without Borders. So basically, I brought 12 books out. I already sold all. This is my last book. But if anybody's interested, I'm selling a signed copy of the U.S. hardcover edition for $35. I ran out of copies, so if you want to put your email here, we'll take your transaction and all proceeds will go to our charity.
all right, thanks everybody. We got 12 minutes for everybody who wants to talk about questions. Thank you so much for being a great panel. Great questions.
Yeah, these were great. I do have cards if anyone is interested. I have our books.
I've got bookmarks up here with the QR code with the Kickstarter for the
We
newest
have
dumpster
QR
master.
codes.
My return from being blind book.
I have a QR code.
Please make a bunch of them.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to ask him what the series is. I'll find out. And yes, he does. But no, if you're interested
On that side
I'm the only book's gone. It starts a series. It ends with one.
I would give you my email address and I could text you or email you and be like, did you write it? I will do it. I will do it. Let me give you my email address and then you can just email me because I have a visceral need.
I have cards, QR codes.
Yes, and then just email me and be like, hey, I do vampire, please get on me. Because I am all over that. Oh my God, yeah. And I'm all about writing accountability writers because I don't get any more stuff.
I'll post you at the end of the day tomorrow.
Oh my God, they do
Okay. Yeah. Sure, yeah, I deal in the same thing.
Yes, and some of their cars.
Yay, you have to say, I need yes.
Robert Smirk. Robert Smirk.
I asked him if he was going to be doing any book signings, and I asked him about the business. He said he could see how that would definitely